All right, kids, this is part two of our read aloud. We're finishing up the read aloud today. So after this, you can go into read and quiz and take the read and quiz for Bears of the Ice by Catherine Lasky. There are three books of this series. This is the first one. So this is Bears of the Ice, The Quest of the Cubs. Make sure you pick the right one. Bears of the Ice, The Quest of the Cubs by Catherine Lasky. Chapter 32. The Cubs Worry. Jite tapped on the tin of Granny Solveig's cocoa. I just don't understand, she said grumpily. It never takes Skagen this long. You know that snow leopards like to travel at Twilliclow. He might have waited, Third said. He was poring over a map of the northern kingdoms of Gahul. Stellan was by his side and pointed with a claw to a long, narrow inlet. They call those firths in Gahul. Mom told us of that. Why don't they call them channels or chuckshys the way we do here? Third asked. They're different, very deep, and there are always high cliffs around them. Once they might have been valleys. How can you two just keep talking about that map? Jite snapped. It's late now, and he's not back. By midnight, the cubs were truly frightened. They had forgotten all about Coco and the maps. Should we go out and hunt for him? Jite asked. Skagen told us very specifically that we should never go near Oddsval, not since those rogers nearly caught us. Too close to the ice spines, Stellan said. But this is an emergency. What if he's hurt? Jite whimpered. He is kind of old, Third said. I know his hip was bothering him the other day. I saw him limping. Limping? Really? Stellan was astonished. I always think of him as moving so smoothly. It's as if he melts through air. A tear began to roll down Jite's face. Stellan was right. Skagen was the most graceful creature on earth. Stellan suddenly sniffed. What's that scent? What scent? Third said. Great vapors of smoke were rolling into the cave. All three cubs thought of the Heligs, the passages with their death air that Skagen had warned them about. Clear air. We must get to the clear tunnel. Near here, I think, Jite gasped. She was coughing. She tried to hold her breath but couldn't, yet every time she breathed, it seared her throat. She staggered, then fell to her knees. Stellan! Stellan! She gasped again and reached out for her brother, but there was nothing. Outside the caves, the Rogers who had murdered Skagen, Jost and Enka had set coals from the twin volcanoes Praia and Papaya in small holes in the ground. Fanning them, they sent drafts of the smoke into the cave. The wind is in our favor, Enka said. It'll help us. The ice clock is pleased, and so the wind comes. Aye, Jost nodded. The ice clock is pleased. They began to chant as the smoke swirled into the cave. The cubs will rush out soon, Inca continued. Casters, stand alert. She nodded to two bears with nets. Hekon, ready your scimitar claws. The cubs must serve the clock or die. The cubs must serve the clock or die, repeated the other bears like a death chorus. Inca craned her neck on her long neck forward, turning to see... Enka craned her head on her long neck forward, turning to see into the mouth of the cave. She was growing impatient. Time check, she demanded. 18 minutes, 24 seconds, and 5 milliseconds. The cubs should have come out by now, but there was no sign of them. Here, here, Third said in a rasping voice. This is the clear tunnel. Jite dragged herself forward, clamping her mouth shut so as not to breathe in the smoke. She heard Stellan beside her, coughing and choking. But finally there was a blast of crisp, cold air. They all inhaled huge draughts of the fresh air as they tumbled into the narrow space, gasping with relief. Their heads began to clear, their sluggish bodies quickened, but outside the Helig they could see that the cave was still roiling with smoke. They were trapped. Chapter 33, a spirit guide, question mark. This is the last chapter of the book, and then there's an epilogue, and I'll explain that what that is. Will we be stuck here forever? Jite asked, her voice raw from the smoke. We can't go out the usual way. There will still be smoke, Stellan replied hoarsely. And they will still be there, Third added. Who? Jite said. Rogers from the ice cap, Stellan said faintly. They're waiting to smoke us out. It was as if Stellan's mind had melded with Enka's. He could almost hear her counting. Stellan felt his sister's panic. He looked at Third, who stood rigid with his eyes clamped shut. There had been terrible times when Third had found himself in the bitter landscape of his mother's mind. But now it was as liking something had entered him, inhabited him. A voice emanated from the tiny cub, but not his own. Follow me! The words came from Third's mouth, but in a deeper voice that did not belong to him. Skagen? Jite blurted. It was exactly the voice of the snow leopard. Spirit guide, Third muttered in his own voice and began trotting down the winding passage of the clear air. The two cubs followed. The passage wound deep beneath the ground and then started to climb up through a tangle of roots. The cubs at last emerged into what might have been at one time a den, and then not far from them they saw the backs of 6 bears gathered at the mouth of Skagen's cave. A voice snarled, It's been 45 minutes, 37 seconds, and 10 milliseconds. Stop the smoking, let the air clear. We shall enter and find them. The 3 cubs watched as the Rogers made preparations to enter the cave. From a few holes dug in the ground, they took red-hot coals and enclosed them in 2 metal boxes, which they put aside. The smoke immediately lessened. The 2 bears with the longest claws the cubs had ever seen entered the cave. They were followed by 2 bears carrying nets, the same kind that had been flung at the cubs on the ice spines. As they disappeared into the cave, Jite started to rise up and tipped her head in the opposite direction. Stellan shook his head. What? Jite whispered. We can't just run away. We need to make sure they don't catch up with us. How? Third asked. We're so little, they're gigantic, and those claws. And I swear some had 2 sets of fangs, Jite said. Fire, Stellan replied evenly. Jite blinked at her brother. She had never seen him like this. He seemed confident, unworried, not a shadow of a second thought, and completely resolute. But she felt her insides roiling with fear. The bear's claws were so long it would be easy for them to reach out and snag any of them. The claws were an evil and ingenious weapon that made these deadly bears even deadlier. They worked quickly. The bears had cleared away most of the junk and debris that had camouflaged the entrance of the cave. The cubs now gathered as much dried brush as they could and began piling it in a big mound at the opening. Then they dumped the coals from the box. The brush ignited quickly. The wind suddenly strengthened, and it was as if the cave devoured the flames. Won't they find the tunnel that leads out as we did? Third asked. Yes, but it's going to take them a long time, Jite said. There was still 1 box of coals left. She ran and grabbed the box and then headed for the den from which the cubs had emerged a few moments before. Shove in those branches with the dried leaves, Stellan. Third joined him. Now, Stellan said. Jite tossed the coals on the leaves and they ignited. They're trapped, Third exclaimed. Within seconds, it seemed as if the entire gilly forest was wrapped in flames. But the cubs found their way through the conflagration to the sea that beckoned. But in their wake, they heard the thunderous rampage of the furious bears and their roars as they ran from the fire. And now, Stellan turned to Jite and Third, we must find Skagen. It was not long before they picked up the tracks of the Roger bears. They had come from Oddsval, exactly where Skagen had gone. Each cub was in its own mind desperately trying to entertain hope that Skagen had somehow escaped the marauding Rogers, but all hope was extinguished as Jite tipped her head up and shrieked, Look! Her voice scratched the sky as she pointed to the scavenging birds. The cubs broke into a gallop. Hey-ah! They roared, flailing their arms wildly at four vultures who were on the ground. Two more just landed. The cubs rushed the birds, and there in front of them lay the broken body of Skagen. No, no, they cried. The snow leopard's eyes were rolled back in his head. His side was rent with gaping holes where the vultures had torn at the flesh. The crack echoed again in Third's head. They broke his spine. Look, Third said. Claw marks of bears. They walked slowly around the snow leopard. The vulture's work had hardly begun, but the marks of bears were all over the body. What are we to do? Third looked at his friends. Huge glistening tears rolled down his face. What are we to do? He was exhausted. Exhausted from his terrible dreams, exhausted from his second sight, so tired he could not think of what to do next. Jite walked up to Third. She put her arm around his shoulders. Skagen was a creature of the mountains, but he always sought the sea of Nunavik. She said, let's take him to the sea. The inlet is still open. That's what we should do. Of course, Third sought. Third sought. Of course, Third thought. For despite his second sight, he often did not know what to do in the moment. And at that moment, it was as if the entire world had skidded out from beneath his feet. He was staggering with grief and doubt and terror. Come along, Third, we'll do this together, Jite said, and gave his shoulder a squeeze. That is the end of the book. I'll read to you the epilogue, which is just a little closing information about what happens after the book, and also probably will give us a couple of clues about the next book, what to expect. So if you liked it, Bears of the Ice, go take the reading quiz. Bears of the Ice, The Quest of the Cubs by Catherine Lasky. And now the epilogue. The three cubs dragged the body past Sivert Hansen's store, down the path that led into the gilly town of Oddsval, past the huge whale skulls looming in the mist on the beach to the edge where the cubs had first scrambled out of the inlet. In the inlet, a large, glistening ice floe was floating by, so the three cubs swam toward the floe, towing Skagen's body and pulled him onto it. They floated with him for a while, and then the cubs began to sing the song of the Shringar winds that Skagen had taught them. Oh, the Shringar winds are a restless wind they long to wander, cross the plains and beyond the Grin, to the land of the ice, their wayward kin. To their wayward kin, that's the way of the Shringar winds. A sudden breeze blew out of the east. A shadow spread across the floe, and with one leap began to walk up into the sky, which was sprinkled with stars. It turned just once and, raising a paw, pointed to the Fighting Bear constellation that was rising in the east and striding toward the west. The last of the lavender light of the Twilight glow had dissolved, but then there was a mute shudder in the sky as a banner of green unfurled. The three cubs slid off the ice floe and into the black water of the Oddsval Inlet and began to swim. Look, Jite said. There they are. She rolled onto her back and floated, looking at the sky. Who? Asked Third. Us, Stellan said softly. The two stars in the Great Bear constellation that wander. Our stars, Jite and Stellan. We've come unstuck again and are skipping ahead of Mum. By now the sky was flicking with the dancing colors of the Ahaliki. Third stopped swimming and was treading water. Jite, Stellan, did you ever dance on an ice floe under the Ahaliki with your mom? Yes, they both said. But, Third, how did you know about the dancing? Surely Taka never danced with you, Stellan asked. Never, but I dreamed it. It was so long ago that we danced with our mum, Jite whispered into the night, that it feels like a dream now to me. Oh no, Third said. It was real. Besides, to dream is to live. Third paused and then turned to the cubs. I know what you dream of, what you seek. and together we'll find it. We needed no answer. He needed no answer, nor did Jite and Stellan need to speak. The cubs looked into one another's eyes and felt the belong. So the three bears swam on toward the bear kingdoms of Gahul to find the den of forever frost, find their father and hope for their mother, break a clock and save their own kind. All right, everybody, that's it. The next book is going to be called Bears of the Ice, Book 2, The Den of Forever Frost. But go ahead and take a moment to take the reading quiz for this. And it's the last week of school. So, everybody, it's been a pleasure. Again, I will be at Park High School next year, so come and say hello to me sometime. Bye now.